an epistle of Paul to the Ethiopians, an epistle of Paul to the Egyptians,
an
epistle of Paul to the Hutus and the Tutsis.
Right.
We don't have that. There's no epistle of Paul to the Arabs. There's no epistle of Paul to the Babylonians.
Exactly.
There's no epistle of Paul to the Edomites.
Yeah, right.
Paul could have very easily perverted Christianity.
Right.
The Paul bashers are just idiots for not seeing that.
And of course, in other books, Paul definitely says that the Edomites are vessels fit for destruction.
Of destruction,
yes.
right.
He does not include them among the Israelites.
And he doesn't include any nation that's non-Israelite.
Right.
Every one of those people Paul wrote an epistle to were dispersed Israelites.
Right, right. And he excludes the descendants of Ishmael, which is your today's Arabs, right?
Absolutely. He excludes them explicitly. Always got.
In the New Testament, Paul says in Romans 11, all Israel will be saved.
Shalom. First and foremost, before I get started, I'm going to give all praises, honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushai, Ba'ashem, Merkak double honors to the apostles and elders at Great Millstone who are learning this truth from. Peace and salutations to the Lord's elect and the 1/3, and as well as you 12 tribes of Israel that are scattered among the heathen, right? Which includes you Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, and you Israelite foreigners, right? And we're going to go into that, into this lesson, right? So, this is the book of James 1:1. It says, James, a servant of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad, greeting, right? So, I'm going to just go over a couple of precepts that the elder Manasseh Zakba made in his video, right? So, he used these precepts in his video. I'm using them in this video. So, the first one is James 1:1, right? So Paul, his epistles, right, his letters, they were for the Israelites. They were not for these heathen Gentile, that these other camps, these other groups like to talk about, right? They weren't for the non-Israelites. They were for the Israelites. But the Israelites, they became quote-unquote Gentiles because they took on the customs of the heathen, right? They started looking like the heathen. They started worshiping the gods of the heathen. But these letters were from, for the Israelites, right? Written by Israelites for Israelites, right? And we're going to go into that deeper. This book of Deuteronomy 28:64. It says, and the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from the one end of the earth and unto the other, right? And there shall serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone, right? So that's just more proof right there that we were going to be scattered among the heathen, right? And, Jake's starting to worship other gods. That's why you see these Jakes out here, they're worshiping Allah, they're worshiping Buddha, they're worshiping fucking stones and crystals and rocks, right? Because, these people, those were part of the curses, right? So why would these other nations that were scattered, right? Why would the Lord be worried about these heathens that are that are worshiping other gods, right? The Lord already knew that these heathens were worshiping, these other gods, right? He was speaking to Israel, right? Because the Lord, he ain't concerned about these fucking, heathens that, aren't following him to begin with, right? These heathens, they've been not following the ways and customs of Israel, right? It was the actual Israelites that went off and started serving and taking on these customs of the heathen, right? And it says right here, this is the book of 1 Peter 1, verse 1. Peter, an apostle of Yahushua HaMashiach, to the strangers scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, right? And basically, if you go into that word, scattered, it says diaspora, which you probably heard that word before, right? And basically, because we were scattered among these heathen, right? And then if you go deeper into the etymology of the word, it means a scattering, dispersion of Israelites dispersed among the foreign nations, right? Of the Christians scattered abroad among the Gentiles, or the Israelites, right? Because we were the actual Christians, But anyway, it's going into the actual Israelites, right? Because Paul's epistles, they weren't for these fucking heathens, which a lot of people want to misuse, right? And just think about it this way, right? If you have an Israelite and he goes to a different country, he goes to China, right? That guy has a Chinese kid, right? And then that Chinese kid, that Chinese guy, he's gonna that Chinese kid, he's gonna take on the customs, right? And he's gonna look like a Jake, right? But he's gonna take on those some features of a Chinese, a Chinese woman, right? And then he gets with another Chinese, lady, right? And then that kid ends up kind of looking like a bit more Chinese, right? And that kid, he's probably if the parent doesn't really teach him anything, he's gonna take on, he's gonna take on the customs of he's gonna take on the language, right? He ain't gonna remember ancient Paleo Hebrew, right? He's gonna be speaking Chinese or speaking Mandarin, right? He's gonna be eating the same foods as Chinese people, right? He's gonna and over time, his offspring are gonna even look more and more and more like so-called Chinese man, right? So over time, you become what? You become Gentile because you forget where you're from, right? It doesn't mean you literally you're actual Gentile. No, you're still an Israelite, through seed line, right? Because what makes you an Israelite is your seed that goes back to the seed of Jacob, right? But it doesn't mean you're an actual Gentile, right? Which a lot of people like to misinterpret, because these scriptures were written by Israelites for the Israelites, right? They're not written for these fucking heathen nations that don't care about Yahweh B'Hashem Yahushai, right? And it says it here in the Strong's G1289, dispersion, right? For example, especially and concretely, the converted Israelite resident in Gentile countries, which are scattered abroad, right? Which goes into another scripture I want to bring out. It's the book of 1 Corinthians 12:2. It says, "Ye know that ye were Gentiles, carried away unto these dumb idols, even as ye were led." So that's proof right there. I was speaking to the Israelites, because how are you going to be a Gentile already as a Gentile when it says ye were Gentiles? That's speaking about the Israelites. The Israelites were Gentiles, after they started taking on those customs, right? So that's proof right there, because a lot of people, they like to misinterpret the scriptures and they don't really know what they're talking about. And the scriptures, it actually cuts them up, right? That's why they get offended at this truth, knowing that there's Israelites that are scattered abroad. So but it cuts them off, knowing that this salvation is for Israel, right? It's not for these heathens, man. Because these heathens, they're going into captivity, as a punishment for what they did to us, right? And there's a lot of people out there, trying to deny this fact, right? That Israel was scattered among the heathen, right? And they want to say that Paul's letters were for the heathen. No, Paul's epistles, they were for the Israelites, right? And this is proof right there. And even Esau, he knows that. He's just saying that in the first clip because he thinks, right? Because these guys, they believe that they follow that Amalekite doctrine, right? they have their 12 tribes completely mixed up, so they're not even, on the correct doctrine. But they know, that Paul's writings, were for the Israelites only, right? They weren't for these heathens, man. So I just wanted to clear that up, and just want to make this quick and edifying, right? With that being said, I'm gonna give all praises, honor to Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai, B'Shem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders at Great Millstone who teach and rule well. Shalom.